So, we spent most of our time yesterday discussing this embryonic phase. We talked about fertilization, the eggs and the sperm coming together, the implantation, the cleavage, this ball of cells that implants into the uterus and how that begins to grow. We missed this one little piece, that these two other membranes that are associated with the embryo that form. The first is called the yolk sac. Wait, what, like an egg yolk, Mr. Hess? Yeah. Because that's what it kind of looks like. That's why they give that. And this is what's really big. Both of these are big into blood cell formations. And the yolk sac really helps with the immune system. The stem cells that make the immune system come from that yolk sac. Here's the picture here that shows you this kind of guy right here is that yolk sac. And again, this is all part of that outer part of that blastocyst that becomes these more specialized structures. Okay? Yes, please. Is that where the waist of the baby comes out? No, not really. At this point, there's not a significant amount of what you and I would think of waste products, like urine or feces. None of that is really being made yet. The organs aren't developed enough to do that. Any sort of biological waste, like carbon dioxide, those metabolic waste products, are coming out through the veins. So, no, at this point, there's not really any waste pieces. Even all through the baby's life, there is some urine, in quotes, that is released into the amniotic fluid, but there's really not any solid waste. Why? The baby's not eating anything. It's getting all of its nutrition straight from the blood from the mother. It's already done the digesting of the food and bringing it to it. It's actually a sign of distress in the baby if right toward the end there is a release of, there is some contents in the bowels. It has a name that I'm blanking on, the meconium, I think is what they call it. It's a very black kind of stool. And if that comes out before the baby's born, then they'll take the baby quickly via C-section, because that can be a problem for it. The last piece is this allantosis, allantois. I don't know how to pronounce that. I apologize. Allantois. And again, this is blood cells. Blood cells in the umbilical veins and arteries come from this guy, and that would be this guy up top here. So yolk sac, the allantois, very similar pieces. All these things go away, right? These are just a very small period of time that these are present. Showed you some pictures yesterday of what the baby looks like here as we move from that embryonic stage into the fetal stage at the 8 weeks after conception and all the way through birth. During this time, lots of growth, right? The organs and things are changing, the body proportions change considerably, but really very little new stuff added. Like basically what the baby needs to live, it has at the beginning of this stage, it just needs to develop and grow further. Does that make sense? If I put up some images here, we showed you some of these last week. So this is starting at week 13 and moving on, showing you sizing of these guys. And again, by the time we get down to this 23 weeks, that looks like a baby. You know, it doesn't look like just this blob of nothingness. But even here is more so. If you zoomed in more, you could see better there. Here is that picture kind of through the months, from 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, as the baby keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It always amazes me to see how smashed that baby is inside that uterus by the time you get to 9 months. And it makes complete and total sense why it's always kicking and pushing and there's just no space. That's what they say.
Does the head always come out?
We hope so. That's the way it's designed to come out. If it's not, that's what we call a breech birth, where the feet are coming first, and they'll literally like try and maneuver. They'll put pressure on the baby to try and make it move to come head down. And if it won't, they'll do a C-section, because it just doesn't work. Things get caught. The baby can't. It gets stuck otherwise. Here's another view, just how the baby grows, right? Remember that 8 weeks before that is embryo, and then as it continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And 40 weeks. Your textbook says 38. 40 is pretty much the accepted time frame because it goes from that time of ovulation going forward. There really isn't any, like, from my understanding, there's not really any problem with it sticking around too long. It won't stay around for years. You know what I mean? By the time you get to that 40-week time frame, 41 weeks is about as far as it'll ever go. Beyond that, the doctors will say, okay, let's just take this cesarean, or give the mother drugs that will help the uterus start contracting and get that process going. But no, it's not like overdone like a cake in the oven too long. No, that's all right. The book talked about the proportions changing, and I thought this was kind of a cool diagram. And again, none of these are in your textbook, but they are up online on Schoology on that Images PowerPoint. Kind of just showing you and I got a lot of conversation going on, guys. Showing you the differences. Like, for a 2-month embryo, almost half of its body length is the head, right? And even as a newborn, a fourth of the body length is its head, right? Versus you and I, we're talking about maybe an eighth of our total height comes from our head, right? And just the different proportions I just thought was very interesting to share. How much longer the legs get, how much thinner the torso gets, smaller comparatively as you move along. During the 5th month is when the mother may first feel the baby move. I don't remember when it was for my wife. Patty, do you remember with your kids about when it was you first felt them?
Depends on how the baby is implanted.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe around 6 months.
Okay. Yeah, it was down the road a ways. It wasn't by any means at the beginning of the pregnancy. I remember my wife describing it feeling like gas first. You know, you had those kind of gas bubbly kind of feelings, and then it's like, oh no, that's definitely something moving. And it got to the point where, I don't know, it's almost like the movie Aliens, where you got this little thing moving around inside. I mean, the baby would flip positions, and you could like literally watch it. I thought it was very cool. We spent many evenings just watching babies move. It was fun. In the final trimester, so again, if you look back at some of these pictures, you know, so at this point, this pretty much looks like a full human, right? At 6 months. So all that's really happening in that last bit of time is everything is maturing. Everything is getting more and more complex. The brain especially, because the baby, they've discovered at this point, is hearing, is listening, is seeing even with its eyes. The different you know, shades of light based upon where the mother is. Because it's a fairly thin membrane between it and the outside. It's starting to make memories, they say. So, I mean, the baby is a fully cognitive thinking something, right? And this is a tough thing. None of us have any of those memories that we can access. No. What happened to them? Did they get overwritten? You know, like a hard drive that just gets replaced? We don't really know, to be honest. But we do know that it can feel pain. It will withdraw from pain, you know, move away from pain if something is there. Again, these are all the questions about when is this actually a human? When is life? Because you realize there are abortions that still take place even 7, 8, 9 months down the road. Fairly rare, but it does happen. You know, normally you're talking about somewhere in this time frame from 1 to 5, but even then you're still talking about a very formed person at that point. Okay, that's really all that the lecture, PowerPoint, immediately they go into posts. Oh, sorry, no, I forgot about this. Really quickly, let's go through the fetal blood circulation. Are you comfortable that there are significant differences in the circulation of a fetus versus you? Can anybody give me a why? Why would their blood flow need to be different than yours? The lungs aren't fully developed, okay. But not even just because they're not fully developed. Sure. I mean, they're not breathing at all, right? Like there is no input-output of air going into their lungs. So there's no reason to send all of the blood in their body to their lungs like there would be for you and I, right? That's how we get our oxygen, is by breathing. Where do the babies get their oxygen from? From the mom, from the mother's circulation, right? So therefore, there are a number of these little trapdoors or shortcuts that basically divert the blood around from where it comes in the umbilical cord to go through the body and then back out the umbilical cord without having to go through all the same places. They do go through the heart, certainly, because the heart is pumping to send it throughout the fetus's body. So a couple of those pieces, let's just talk about a few of them. And I think that was one of the questions that was in your textbook for sure, and I can't remember if it was on your study guide. Did I have something on there about fetal circulation? Forgive me, I can't remember. Well, we'll call it important even if it's not there. So, from the umbilical vein, it transports the blood that has very rich in oxygen and nutrients, enters the body and travels to the liver. So it goes first from the umbilical cord to the liver, where half of the blood is there to the liver, and the rest bypasses the liver. It goes through this what's called a ductus venosus that bypasses it right into the inferior vena cava. There's a good picture, if you want to see it, is here. What page is this on? That fetal circulation. This is here on page 564. That will kind of walk you through that process as arrows. You can follow along with us. So it's coming in, right? Half of it through the liver, and the other half going up into that inferior vena cava. There's this foramen ovale. Did I miss anything here? No. The foramen ovale that conveys a large portion of that blood entering the right atrium from that inferior vena cava. It goes through the atrium septum, so that division between the left and the right atrium. So it goes right between those guys through that foramen ovale, again, so we don't have to go to the lungs. Because remember, right side of the heart is pumping to the lungs, right, to be oxygenated in you and I, then comes back into the left side. This is basically a shortcut right between the two atriums to let that blood flow. Are you comfortable that has to close when you're born? Once you start breathing? Otherwise, if it stayed open, this would be a problem. And there are babies that this happens. They have to go in and surgically repair and close this foramen ovale. It's going to be pretty quick. There's like a flap, basically, and as you're breathing in, as you start breathing oxygen, that flow needs to go through there. It closes up. It's actually pretty ingenious how that works. There's another bypass they call the ductus arteriosus. Remember this from our cats and our pigs? This ductus arteriosus that goes from the pulmonary trunk directly to the aorta. So again, coming out of that left side of the heart, the right side, when the right atrium pumps and it would normally go up the pulmonary trunk to go to the lungs, it goes right, it bypasses that to get into the aorta. And all of those umbilical arteries then carry the blood from the internal iliac arteries to the placenta, where it can exchange waste and again pick up more oxygen and nutrients. So it's got this system of moving to get the baby what it needs. And there are certain medications that will cross that barrier. You'll maybe hear this conversation about, does this drug cross the placenta? That's what they're saying. If the mother takes this, will it go into the baby? And there's a whole series of medications that a mother will have to maybe stop taking because it would affect the fetus. Or certain medications they won't take because they know it will affect the fetus if they do. Any questions there? Okay, so the birth process. pregnancy continues. Again, here it says 38 weeks. 40 is the number that I hear pretty consistently. I'm not sure where their 38 comes from. And begin by the baby, or the terminates in the birth process, the baby actually being born. So as the placenta ages, less and less progesterone is produced, which is normally inhibiting the uterine contractions. Again, these cramps that you have during your menstrual cycle come from that progesterone going away, because it's literally contracting to push this extra tissue and extra fluid out. So this same thing starts to happen again in this birthing process. That decreasing progesterone stimulates prostaglandins, making of these proteins called prostaglandins, which also helps stimulate this labor sequence. We truthfully don't 100% know exactly what causes labor to begin, like why this day versus another day. We're not good enough to know that yet. But we know some of these things like prostaglandins and oxytocin, that these both help stimulate the uterus to contract and literally squeeze the baby out is our goal. And that's what we call that positive feedback loop. Remember, we've talked a ton about negative feedback loops, right? Where something goes up or something changes, and the body quickly does something to make it go back to normal. That's a negative feedback loop, right? A positive feedback loop is just the opposite. So something is changing. In other words, the uterus is contracting, right? And suddenly, the body does things to make that contract harder, stronger. And it's this loop of continuing getting stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger until finally, pop, the baby comes out, and then the process stops. Very few of these positive feedback loops in the body, but this is a classic one. This contraction of the uterus. Yes, sir?
Does the pain stop immediately right after the baby comes out?
Well, realize that you've stretched and moved things in ways that they normally don't move. So no, there's certainly a lot of soreness that sticks around for a good period of time. Yeah, no, it's not an immediate kind of something. But again, that pressure of the contractions and all of that do stop, though there's a whole other afterbirth piece we'll talk about in a second too. So a couple of pieces that maybe you were unaware of. Let's go back to this image PowerPoint. Here's a look at the mother. So this is in weeks, 14 weeks up to 39 weeks. So you notice that even, we're talking about 3, almost 4 months in, there's very little change. Like there's very little difference in the woman's body. But then very quickly you start seeing growth, right? Stomachs get bigger. And that causes a whole series of other changes. Because this comes forward, it means more pressure on the back. It means more pressure on the hips. The baby's growing, so there's less room. Right? My wife talked about having to go to the bathroom, it seemed like every 2 minutes, because there just wasn't enough space for this baby to coexist with her bladder and with her bowels. Like there's just not room. It's amazing to me how little space there actually is there. This is showing that picture of the baby in this head down position. I mean, notice, here's the spine, right? I mean, this is normally where all of the abdominal organs are. They all just get pushed up and out of the way, so that baby's got room to grow. In this birthing process, there's 2 things you'll hear them talk about: the cervix and the cervix being effaced and the cervix being dilated. 0% effaced means the cervix is basically all about its normal thickness, we'll call it like the length of my hands here, and gradually it wants to be thinned out. Does that make sense? So it's thick here that wants to be thinned and stretched, basically, is what's happening. And they'll grade that on a scale of 0 to 100%. And then the cervix has to dilate. The opening has to dilate, going from 0 centimeters, because it's closed normally, up to 10 centimeters. Now, what does that look like in actual things? Well, I thought this is a great visual guide. A 1 centimeter is a Cheerio. 10 centimeters is a bagel. And that's how big that cervix has to dilate in order to let that baby's head come out, because the head's the biggest part, right? Which, yeah, all the guys are like, wait, what? All the ladies, really? What? Yeah, that's what it is. And that's what these contractions are doing, that they're literally opening and moving that cervix wider and wider. So you have that birthing process where you see that baby comes, has to go around the pubic symphysis. My son had a big spot right on his nose here when he was born because he literally got caught on the pubic symphysis with my wife. They had to use this little suction cup thing and like kind of pull him out because he was just stuck. His nose was stuck there. It has to make this little turn down and under to make it, again, through this opening, right? Through the opening of the pelvis. I mean, it's not a huge area, but it has to kind of go, again, go down and out. Mrs. Serrano was kind enough to be willing to share with you some of her experiences. I can tell you about our experiences, but that's not firsthand. She's got some firsthand information. I'll turn it over to you. You want this guy, do you?